Now, to address this, we need to get over a key erroneous assumption of many LDS critics. That is, that the Book of Mormon never claims that the Americas were without inhabitants at the coming of the several migrant groups. Mentioned in the Book of Mormon. In fact, it hints early on, at a sizable population that at some point joined with the migrant groups. That being said, we have here a representation of an Asiatic pre-presence, represented by the orange triangle there. Inserted at some point, we have the Book of Mormon migrations. Note, it's again important to stress that only three founders from these groups have a specific delineation of lineage. We also lack DNA samples we can definitively tie to the three's explicitly given ancestral ties. So, back to this insertion. If you'll notice, I've already extended the non-Asiatic insertion into an individual specific diamond. That is, this is the non-Asiatic thing extended into a diamond to an hypothetical individual that this would apply to. An observant person may ask why the diamond is so skewed. That is, why the heck is the diamond like really long here, really short there? Well, following the Book of Mormon claims as to when people, as to what happened to the migrants that came here, was that they were extinguished at various times to various degrees, but ultimately had some extinguishing point around 400 AD. So the time period between when there was mass decimation of the culture and the time when they were in full swing, it's going to skew that diamond thusly. Now, we're going to take an inherently larger green diamond to represent the individual's ties, that is, the individual that would be represented by that point, their ties to their Asiatic ancestry, the pre-Asiatic, the pre-presence of their Asiatic ancestors. Again, we have the points in the diamond in which shared ancestry become much more likely. And we're talking about some point where your shared ancestry is going to be more likely. With regards to this, the green diamond, it's probably up around here. With the pink diamond, it's probably up around here. But there's a point up here in the upper portion where it's likely that whichever hypothetical individual you chose down here would be much more likely, almost virtually unavoidably tied to most of the people up here, if not all. Now this gives, this narrowing gives another effect. It makes it so that changes and happenings that occur in this top portion have a much longer lasting effect. If you get a specific matriarchal or patriarchal line cut off up here, it's not as likely to shift, the triangles aren't as likely to shift the higher up here you get relative to whichever hypothetical individual you chose down here. So the more set this is, and items that, occurrences that happened here as far as genetic mixing, would have a far greater lasting effect and wouldn't be as movable relative to what you could get down here in this portion. So if the lines are cut off or significantly marginalized early on up here, they could not even appear at all once you got down here as far as along the matriarchal or patriarchal lines. So as you vary this graphic representation again, as you choose different individuals represented down here, the position of this insertion is not as likely to change the higher up it is. So if things were cut off early on, they still, even if they took up significant portions up here, they could be greatly diluted once you get down to here, and even to the point of not being findable by the DNA evidence that is presently used, the mitochondrial and the Y chromosome DNA evidence. Now, to get the representation up here to move over, again, in order for it to register on the evidence that's been taken and presented against supposedly against the Book of Mormon, these lines would have to run up into a patriarchal or matriarchal line, a purely patriarchal or matriarchal line, because if they do not, they will not show up in the evidences that have been taken thus far. So if it doesn't hit a single side at any point, and of course if it hit a side it would remain along that side, then it is not going to register in the evidence, no matter what portion of this was occupied by the influence of those non-Asiatic ancestors. And again, wherever this is positioned, the drift, the higher up you go, the less likely drift is to occur, because things were more set, and the convergence of all the ancestors from everybody becomes more set. So, and to even further this, if you had the insertion of other groups later on, say after the Book of Mormon times, it would further complicate this, because you would have added interference. So even if it wasn't completely wiped out up here as far as the matriarchal and patriarchal markers, further interference later on could effectively clean up what wasn't taken care of by early on cancellations of the evidence up there. Again, this is not to say that there's not genetic markers in the people's blood connected to it. There's just not genetic markers in their Y chromosome DNA or their mitochondrial DNA. So this makes one think. We can have DNA evidence, yet we can still have 1, 2, 4, and more non-Asiatic ancestors, all with none of them being at all present in the DNA tests utilized thus far in connection to the Book of Mormon. Now our critics, they have an interesting view of this, because they feign to be for full disclosure. If you want full disclosure, you should include the limitations of the evidence you've given, which most of them do not. Well, thanks again for tuning in to Hive Radicals YouTube. I'll probably be talking to you soon, unless you don't listen to another one of my vids.